At the beginning of the story, we meet a girl named Gia. She lives with her father, Lee. Gia's mother passed away many years ago, and since then, Lee has raised Gia all by himself. He cares for her deeply. Like any other day, Gia gets ready for school after having breakfast. Lee takes her to school, reminding her to study hard and get good grades. Gia shares her wish to have a dog, explaining that all her friends have one. Lee responds by saying their situation is different. He reminds her that a dog needs to be fed and taken for walks. Gia insists that if he buys her a dog, she will take care of it after school. Lee considers this and eventually agrees. After dropping Gia off at school, he heads to work. After school, Gia goes to play games with her friends, losing track of time until it's evening. Meanwhile, Lee is busy at his job. He works for a construction company, where he spends his days building and creating things. Lee sends a message to Gia, urging her to come home quickly because rain is on the way. As soon as she reads the message, Gia rushes out of the playground, where she has been having fun with her friends. They walk her to the railway station, but once they arrive, they say their goodbyes and leave her to travel home alone. Gia hops on the metro and enjoys the ride, feeling a mix of excitement and independence. When she gets off, she begins her walk home. However, the sky darkens, and soon it starts to pour heavily. The rain creates puddles on the road, and Gia pulls her jacket tighter around her to stay warm and dry. Meanwhile, Lee finishes his work for the day, thinking that Gia is already home. He heads straight to her room, expecting to find her there, but the room is empty. Concerned, he starts searching the entire house, calling out her name, but there's no sign of her. He tries to call her on her phone, but it goes straight to voicemail. Feeling anxious, he decides to contact Gia's friends. They inform him that they had left her at the railway station. This news makes Lee's heart race with worry. He quickly rushes to the station, scanning the area for any sign of his daughter, calling out her name in desperation. As the hours pass, the situation takes a dark turn. The next day, some people notice something unusual in the river, a body floating on the surface. Officer June and his junior officer arrive to investigate. As they approach, Officer June realizes the body is that of Gia, wrapped in plastic. His heart sinks as he examines the scene, noting that the body had been in the water for no less than 34 hours. He instructs his team to check for any missing person reports, hoping to gather more information. After some time, Officer June calls Lee to the hospital. When Lee arrives and sees his daughter's lifeless body, tears flood his eyes. He is in disbelief that the vibrant girl he had shared laughter and love with just the day before is gone forever. Overcome with grief, he cradles her in his arms, crying uncontrollably. June gently asks Lee if Gia has a boyfriend, hoping to gather leads in the investigation. Lee shakes his head, utterly confused and devastated, unable to comprehend why anyone would harm his daughter. The loss feels unbearable, and he is left with countless questions, haunted by the mystery of Gia's tragic fate. After Gia's body is examined, a post-mortem is conducted, and the forensic report reveals a disturbing truth: 2 individuals were involved in Gia's tragic fate. Officer June, noticing Lee's devastated state, decides not to share the details with him. He can see that Lee is shattered and feels entirely alone in the world. Lee is consumed by guilt, believing that if he had gone to pick up Gia himself, she might have been safe. An assistant officer tries to comfort Lee, assuring him, "Don't worry, we will find the culprits." The next day, June and his junior officer return to the location where Gia's body was discovered. June speculates that the perpetrator must have hurriedly discarded her body, intending to make it disappear. Unfortunately, the body didn't sink as planned. The junior officer expresses concern, saying, "If these people don't have a criminal record, it will be very difficult to track them down." This statement adds to June's worry, but they remain determined to seek justice for Gia. Back at the station, they start reviewing the CCTV footage. They manage to spot Gia for the last time at the station and notice a woman lingering outside. Their attention is drawn to a white van parked nearby, sparking their suspicion. They zoom in on the footage and manage to catch a glimpse of the driver's face. They learn that his name is Leo. The following day, the officers visit the area where the van is parked, close to Leo's house. They find Leo inside, busy cleaning the van. As they investigate, they spot Gia's phone tucked away inside. Leo quickly pockets the phone, which raises further suspicion. Meanwhile, the officers decide to question Leo's father about the van since he owns it and occasionally drives it as well. They hope to gather more information that could lead them to the truth behind Gia's tragic end and the people responsible for it. Feeling increasingly anxious at the sight of the police, Leo rushes inside his house and locks himself in his room. His mind races back to the night when Gia was walking alone. Leo and his friends, Wang and Yu, were sitting in their van when they spotted her. Eager for a thrill, they decided to approach her. The three of them got out of the van and, under the cover of darkness, grabbed Gia from behind, rendering her unconscious. They placed her inside the van and drove to Wang's house, where they laid her on the bed. Just then, Leo received a call from his father, who told him to bring the van back home. Feeling anxious about leaving his friends with Gia, Leo reluctantly told Wang and Yu he was going home. Deep down, he feared his friends would do something terrible to Gia. Wang and Yu taunted him, reminding him that since he had driven the car, he would be implicated if anything went wrong. Meanwhile, Li was spiraling into despair after losing his daughter. In his grief, he found himself riding the same metro train Gia had taken on her last journey. While traveling, he caught a glimpse of a news report on TV announcing the discovery of Gia's body in the river. Panic seized him. He hurried to meet his friends for support, but they coldly told him that if Gia had lived, she would have surely reported them to the police. To keep their secret safe, they had killed her. They warned Leo to stay quiet about what happened, and in a fit of rage and guilt, they beat him for suggesting that they had done something wrong by taking Gia's life. Unable to cope with the weight of his conscience, Leo decided to take action. He grabbed Gia's phone and headed to the river where her body was found, filled with sadness and regret. In a moment of desperation, he messaged Li from Gia's phone, revealing the truth: "Your daughter was killed by Wang and Yu." He even provided Li with Wang's address before throwing the phone into the river, hoping to erase any trace of his involvement. Meanwhile, Li, driven by a burning desire for answers, receives the shocking message. After failing to get a response from Wang when he calls, he heads straight to Wang's house to confront him. Finding the door locked, Li remembers Leo had mentioned a key, so he uses it to enter the home. Once inside, he starts searching through the house, determined to find clues. Just then, Wang arrives, chatting with someone on the phone. Li quickly hides, heart pounding. As he searches the room, he discovers Gia's bag, which sends waves of sorrow crashing over him. His eyes catch sight of Wang's computer, and he feels a surge of anger as he realizes that Wang might have recorded what he did to Gia. Wang sits at his desk, watching the video he had taken during that horrific night, seemingly unbothered by his actions, believing he is untouchable because he is only 17. Fueled by grief and rage, Li realizes that he wants revenge for what happened to his beloved daughter. Li storms in front of Wang, his fury boiling over as he confronts him. Without hesitation, he lunges at Wang, and a fierce fight breaks out between the two. In a fit of rage, Li grabs a baseball bat and strikes Wang with it, killing him instantly. The moment is chaotic, filled with the echoes of their struggle and the realization of Li's actions. Afterward, Li takes a moment to collect himself. He snaps a photo of Wang and Yu, wanting to keep a record of the confrontation. He also grabs Wang's phone before changing his clothes to avoid suspicion. As he leaves the house, he sends a message to Yu from Wang's phone, pretending to be Wang. He tells Yu that he is going out of town to deliver a car and asks him to meet him at Wang's house. Meanwhile, the police, led by Officer Jun, arrive at the scene of the crime. They start their investigation in Wang's house, where they discover the horrifying video Wang recorded, not only of Gia but also of two other girls he had victimized. This evidence adds a disturbing layer to the case and raises questions about Wang's past actions. Later, Officer Jun attempts to call Li, but he doesn't answer. Investigators find blood-stained clothes in Li's home, leading them to suspect that he is involved in Wang's murder. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Jun and his team intensify their efforts to apprehend Li. They also decide to arrest Yu, recognizing his potential involvement in the crimes. Yu's parents are summoned to the police station for questioning. They are wealthy and influential, and when Jun explains what their son is accused of, they quickly jump to his defense. He's just a kid. This kind of thing happens at his age. You wouldn't have done anything wrong without being pushed by the girls, they insist, downplaying the seriousness of the situation. June, frustrated by their denial, feels his anger rising. He knows the truth of the terrible deeds that have transpired and is determined to seek justice. As Yu's parents prepare to leave, the father of another victim confronts them. "You killed my daughter," he shouts, his voice filled with anguish. This father reveals that Lee had also wronged his daughter, blackmailing her to keep quiet about the abuse. Consumed by shame and despair, she had ultimately taken her own life by jumping from a building. Meanwhile, Lee arrives at a secluded place where he often used to go, a rented house tucked away from the world. Holding Wang's pen drive, he discovers a video revealing that Wang had done terrible things to a girl in a nearby garage. Fueled by anger and desperation, he takes a picture of Yu and heads straight to the garage. When Lee arrives, the mechanics refuse to share any information unless he pays them. Frustrated, a fight breaks out, and during the scuffle, one of the workers gets shot in the leg, sending everyone into a panic. In the chaos, the injured worker reveals a location where Yu often hangs out, but he admits he doesn't know much about it. As Lee continues his search, news of his actions makes headlines. A woman watching TV recognizes him and decides to help him. While he is away, she sneaks a peek at the videos on his laptop, trying to learn more about the situation. When Lee returns, she is questioned by a few people about his presence in her home. She calmly denies any knowledge of him, stating that no new man has moved in. Realizing that the woman is aware of his situation, Lee tells her that he doesn't need to take the law into his own hands. The police will eventually catch the criminals and deliver justice. He urges her to convince him to surrender, saying that if he doesn't act now, the police will catch them but likely release them after a few years. They will get married, have children, and live their lives. "But what about my daughter? She is never coming back," he laments. Meanwhile, Officer June discovers that one of the videos on the pen drive shows Lee in a hotel with a clear shot of you. This leads to an arrest order for you. Lee, still driven by his quest for vengeance, heads to the hotel with the help of the woman who has been sheltering him. He successfully evades the police and positions himself at the hotel, waiting for you, gun in hand. When the police arrive at the hotel, they don't find you, but they do come across a terrified girl who claims you tortured her and filmed their encounters. The junior officer intends to call her parents, but the girl panics and insists that Yu has threatened to release the video online. Just then, she receives a call from Yu, and in a state of fear, she tells him everything, revealing that the police are nearby. Realizing he needs to escape, Yu bolts on his KTM bike, but Lee is ready for him. In a desperate act, he takes aim and fires at the bike, causing Yu to crash and tumble to the ground. Dazed but determined, Yu scrambles to his feet and flees into the nearby forest, leaving behind a trail of chaos and desperation. As Officer June spots Lee, he rushes to catch him. When Lee sees the police, he runs away. He races down the stairs, getting more tired as he goes. June calls out for him to stop, but Lee keeps going. "They did awful things to my daughter. I can't let them get away," he shouts. Lee believes that if he doesn't take action, the law won't help him, and those responsible for his daughter's death will continue to live while she is gone. June, feeling torn between his duty as a police officer and understanding Lee's pain, decides to let him go instead of shooting. Later, June talks with his junior officer about a sad case. They mention 3 underage boys, where 2 of them hurt another boy so badly that he died. They got only 15 years in jail, and now they are free. This case weighs heavily on June, reminding him how the justice system often fails. Meanwhile, Leo gets a call from Yu, asking for money and telling him to meet at the station the next day at midnight. Leo nervously says he hasn't told the police about it. Unbeknownst to them, the police are nearby, listening to the whole conversation. The next day, June and the other officers wait at the station for Yu to arrive. Lee is also there, hiding with a gun, ready for revenge. When Leo arrives and gives money to Yu, the police jump in to arrest him. Yu sees the danger and starts to run. In the chaos, Lee catches up to Yu and points the gun at him. Yu begs for his life, saying he's sorry for what happened to Jia. Even though Yu pleads for mercy, Lee is determined. The officers shout at Lee to put down the gun, but in a moment of anger, he shoots Yu in the eye. In response, A police officer shoots Lee, and he falls to the ground, hurt but still alive, having lost one eye from the gunshot. A year later, Officer June and his junior officers visit Lee's memorial to honor him. As they stand quietly, June thinks about the challenges of being a parent. It's easy to have children, he says, but teaching them to do the right thing is very hard. The weight of Lee's story is heavy in the air as they reflect on the pain of loss and the problems in the justice system. The film ends, leaving the audience to think about what has happened and the consequences for everyone involved.